The piano stopped the moment she spoke. I'll spend one night with you, but you must give me $10. Every man in Whiskey Ben's saloon turned toward the voice, a smooth, low drawl that cut through the smoke and whiskey haze. Evelyn Hart, 30 years old, stood in the doorway with a travel coat too fine for the dust and eyes too proud for begging. Her red hair was half-tamed beneath her hat, her face streaked with road dust, and her hands trembled just enough to betray the hunger behind her offer. Across the room, a tall figure sat alone by the fire, a man who didn't belong there. His skin was bronze under the flicker of lamplight, his long black hair tied with rawhide, his chest bare beneath a weathered cavalry jacket. The Apache didn't drink, didn't move, didn't even look at her until she finished speaking. "You speak price before name," he said finally, his deep voice rolling like distant thunder. The saloon keeper chuckled. "Girl, that one don't even speak English half proper, let alone care for your kind of business." Laughter rippled across the room, cruel and sharp. Evelyn didn't flinch. "I ain't looking for laughter," she said, eyes locked on the warrior. "Just $10 and a roof for the night." The Apache rose, slow and quiet. He was taller than any man there, scarred across the shoulder and arms from battles no white man had survived. He walked past the crowdmen shrinking back instinctively and stopped in front of her. "You have a tongue like a hawk's beak," he said. "Sharp, but it trembles." She met his eyes. "I've walked 80 miles from Tucson, barefoot half the way. If I tremble, it's from the dust in my bones, not fear." The saloon keeper barked, "Get her out of here, Koda. She's trouble. You don't want no woman like that near your kind." The Apache's gaze never left her face. "My kind knows trouble well." Without another word, he threw a silver coin onto the counter, took her arm, and led her outside into the cool desert night. The air outside was sharp, the stars white as frost. Horses shifted restlessly in the corral. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter. "You didn't have to drag me out like that," she said, breathless. "I saved you from wolves," Koda said simply. "They smile with teeth in there. I'm no lost lamb." He glanced at her boots' cracked leather, blood seeping at the heel. "No, you're the wolf who's forgotten how to hunt." Evelyn's eyes softened despite herself. "Then what are you?" Koda mounted his horse, a dark stallion with a streak of white down its muzzle. "I am the man you owe $10 to." She frowned. "You're the one who owes me 10, remember?" His lips twitched. "You'll earn it at dawn." Before she could argue, he extended a hand. "Come, there's a cabin near the ridge. Safer than the saloon. You sleep there. No man touches you." She hesitated, scanning his face for deceit, but found none. Only exhaustion and a strange kind of honor dot by the time they reached the cabin. The moon was a cold coin hanging low. Inside, the place smelled of cedar and smoke. A fire already burned in the stone hearth, casting gold over the wooden walls. Koda laid down his rifle, poured water into a tin cup, and handed it to her. She drank in silence. He watched Dot. Finally, he said, "Why sell your night for $10? Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Because I need to buy a name back. A dead one." He didn't speak, but she could feel him listening, the kind of listening that carried no judgment, only patience. "My husband," she said softly, "was killed near these hills. They said it was an accident, but he found gold before he died. Men kill for less than that." Koda's eyes darkened. "I've seen white men kill for a single bullet." She met his gaze. "Then you understand why I'm here." He nodded slowly. "Tomorrow I take you there, to the hills where men forget mercy." Evelyn stared at the fire. "You'd help a stranger?" Koda's voice dropped to a whisper. "Once, a woman gave me water when I was hunted. She did not ask for gold. Maybe I repay her through you." Outside, coyotes began to howl. Inside, the silence felt sacred. Two broken souls sharing warmth, not by bargain, but by need. And somewhere in that silence, Evelyn realized the night she tried to sell might cost far more than $10. Dawn bled across the desert like a slow fire. The first light turned the red cliffs of Ash Canyon into towering walls of gold, and the air shimmered with heat long before the sun fully rose. Evelyn Hart rubbed her eyes as she sat by the dying embers of the cabin fire. She hadn't slept much. The floorboards creaked with every restless turn and every time she closed her eyes. She saw her husband's face buried beneath the rubble of the old mine. Koda moved silently near the corral, tightening the saddle straps on his horse. The muscles on his back flexed with each motion, scars catching the sunlight like pale rivers against bronze skin. His hair hung loose now, streaked with dust, and a faint trail of sage smoke followed him from where he'd burned dried leaves in a clay. Bowl at dawn. Evelyn watched him for a moment, studying the strange calm that seemed to cling to him. "You always start your day with fire?" she asked, stepping out into the light. He didn't look up. "Fire speaks to the spirits before the journey begins. It tells them we still live." She smirked softly. "I just drink coffee." Koda finally turned, the faintest glimmer of a smile on his face. "Then you speak to smaller spirits." They rode out soon after, the sound of hooves echoing through the dry gulch. Evelyn rode a smaller bay mare Koda had loaned her, its coat the color of dust and its temperament gentle. She wasn't used to long rides, her legs ached, her back stiffened, but pride kept her silent. By mid-morning, the sun had burned the chill away. They followed a narrow trail snaking between red rock walls where lizards darted over the stones and the smell of mesquite lingered in the air. "How far to the mine?" she asked. Koda pointed toward the horizon where jagged cliffs rose like broken teeth. 2 hours. Maybe less if the wind stays kind. The wind has moods? She asked dryly. He looked at her, eyes narrowing with faint amusement. Everything alive has moods. Even stone. Evelyn smiled despite herself. The desert, harsh and endless, began to feel less like emptiness and more like something breathing, watching. She wondered if that was Koda's doing, or her own need to believe that this journey had meaning. After a while, he broke the silence. "You said your husband found gold near here." "Yes. He sent a letter before he died. Said he struck something rich, but he never made it home." Her voice wavered. "They said the shaft caved in. I never saw his body, just his tools and his hat." Koda's brow furrowed. "White men from the town. They went to the mine after?" "Yes, the sheriff, a few miners, some of his old partners. And they found nothing. Nothing they told me about." Koda grunted softly. "Then someone wanted you far from here. Dead men don't keep secrets, but widows do." Evelyn's heart tightened. "You think they killed him?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence spoke louder than words. They reached a dry riverbed around noon. Koda dismounted, crouched, and brushed his fingers across the sand. Evelyn watched as he studied the faint impressions in the dirt hoof prints. Fresh. He looked up sharply. "Someone follows us." Her stomach dropped. "Who?" He stood, scanning the ridges. 3 horses. Light riders. Not army, not Apache. Maybe men from your husband's mine. Evelyn's voice trembled. "Then we can't go there." Koda cut her off, his tone calm but cold. "No, we go faster. They follow our shadow, but I know the land. The canyon splits ahead, one path to death, one to truth." She gripped her reins tighter. "Which one are we taking?" His gaze met hers, steady, dark, and unflinching. "Both." By the time they reached the narrow pass, the sun had turned cruel. The wind carried the metallic taste of dust, and Evelyn's throat burned. The trail opened suddenly into a valley littered with the remains of old mining equipment, shattered wagons, rusted tools, and half-buried timbers jutting from the ground like bones. Koda stopped, scanning the cliffs. "This is where your husband worked?" She nodded slowly, heart pounding. "Yes, that's the place there." She pointed toward a dark opening halfway up the slope. The mouth of the mine looked like a wound carved into the earth, but before they could move, a rifle cracked. The shot echoed through the canyon, splintering a boulder near Koda's head. Evelyn gasped. "Down!" He barked, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind a fallen log. Another bullet hissed past. "Who are they?" she cried. He peered over the rock, eyes narrowing. "Men who don't want you to find what your husband left." Evelyn's voice shook. "What do we do now?" Koda loaded his rifle, face hard as the stone around them. "Now," he said, "we make them wish they never followed a ghost into Apache land." The next shot never came. The canyon fell silent, but the silence felt like a warning. Evelyn looked at him, realizing that whatever truth waited in that mine, it would cost far more than $10. The silence that followed the gunfire was thick enough to choke on. Dust drifted through the canyon air, glittering in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the cliffs. Evelyn Hart crouched behind a fallen log, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She dared a glance over the splintered wood, but the ridges were still. No movement, no sound. Just the wind sighing through the rocks. Koda stood slowly, his sharp eyes scanning every crack and shadow. The Apache warrior's body was tense, every muscle poised. The faint glint of a rifle barrel flashed high on the ridge, then vanished. "They're watching," he murmured. "Waiting, for what?" Evelyn whispered, "For us to run." He motioned for her to stay low, then moved across the ground with a panther's grace, silent despite the gravel underfoot. Evelyn followed, clutching the reins of her horse, each step making her breath tremble. They slipped behind a cluster of boulders near the base of the ridge. "Whoever they are," Koda said softly, "they don't want witnesses." Evelyn's throat tightened. "They killed my husband, didn't they?" Koda met her gaze. "Maybe. Or maybe they kill for the same gold he found." He looked toward the black mouth of the mine up the hill. "That's where your answers sleep." A shot cracked again, hitting the rock just above her head. Evelyn screamed, ducking down. Koda spun, raising his rifle in one smooth motion and firing back toward the ridge. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder. "Go!" he barked. "Run to the mine." Evelyn didn't think she ran. Her boots slipped on the loose gravel, her lungs burning as she scrambled up the slope. Behind her, Koda fired again, then sprinted after her, moving fast despite the gunfire that chased them. When they reached the mine entrance, Evelyn stumbled inside, falling to her knees in the cool darkness. Koda followed, dragging a broken wooden beam to block the doorway. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. He listened for a long moment, then exhaled. "They ride off for now." Evelyn's hands trembled as she brushed the dust from her face. The air inside the mine was thick with the smell of damp earth and iron. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Yes," Koda said. "So we find what we came for before they do." They lit a lantern from his pack. The faint flame flickered across the tunnel walls, revealing the scars of old picks and rusted rails from the mining carts. Water dripped somewhere in the dark, echoing like the tick of a clock. Evelyn's voice was small. "I used to dream he'd strike gold and we'd start a new life. He wrote me letters full of plans, a cabin, maybe even children." She looked around, eyes stinging. "And this is what it came to." Koda walked ahead, lantern held high. "Gold blinds even those who never see it. It poisons the tongue, the heart." She followed, her steps slow, each echo reminding her that she was walking where her husband had taken his last breath. Then something caught her eye. A piece of cloth half buried in the dirt. Wait. Evelyn bent down, pulling it free. It was a torn piece of a shirt familiar, even through the grime. This was his. Her voice broke. He died here. Koda knelt beside her, examining the fabric. Not long dead. Maybe weeks, maybe months. But look, he pointed to a small hole near the collar, blackened around the edges. Bullet wound. Evelyn froze. So it wasn't an accident. He nodded grimly. No, someone shot him. Then buried the mine to hide it. She pressed the cloth to her chest, tears streaking the dirt on her face. Why? What was he trying to tell me in that letter? Koda's gaze moved to the wall ahead. Faint markings were carved into the rock symbols and numbers scratched with a miner's knife. Maybe this, he said. A map. He raised the lantern higher, and the markings came to lifelines leading deeper into the shaft, ending in a crude circle with an X carved through it. Evelyn swallowed hard. He left this for me. Koda nodded. Then he knew someone would come for you. Those men outside, they knew too. The ground trembled suddenly, and dust rained from the beams above. Evelyn gasped. What was that? Koda's eyes narrowed. They're sealing us in. The sound of rocks tumbling echoed from the entrance. Outside, the riders were pushing boulders down the slope, collapsing the mouth of the mine. Evelyn screamed. We're trapped. Koda grabbed her wrist. Not yet. There's another way the map shows it. He pointed deeper into the darkness, toward a narrow tunnel that twisted away like a vein through the earth. We follow your husband's trail. If he made a second way out, that's where it'll lead. Evelyn hesitated, fear clawing at her chest. And if it doesn't? Koda's dark eyes met hers, fierce and steady. Then we dig. The earth takes what it wants, but it will not take you. Evelyn tightened her grip on the torn cloth and nodded. Together, they stepped into the blackness, the lantern flame trembling between them like a fragile heartbeat. Behind them, the sound of falling rocks swallowed the light from the world outside. The deeper they went, the tighter the air became, heavy with dust and the faint metallic scent of iron. The lantern flame wavered in Koda's hand, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. Evelyn Hart followed close behind, clutching her husband's torn cloth and the memory of his last words like a prayer. The tunnel sloped downward, the ground slick with mud and scattered with old rails from mining carts. Somewhere in the dark, water dripped in slow, steady rhythm like the ticking of an invisible clock counting down. Are you sure this leads out? Evelyn asked, her voice small, echoing through the hollow earth. Koda nodded without turning. The map your husband carved pointed this way. He would not mark a dead path. His voice carried calm certainty, but his eyes betrayed unease. The earth felt alive down here, breathing, groaning, shifting with every step. They passed a broken cart overturned on its side, half buried in rubble. A skeleton's arm stuck out from beneath it, the sleeve torn and the bone pale as candle wax. Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth. Leave him, Koda said softly. He is part of the mine now. Evelyn whispered, How many men died here? Too many, Koda answered. Gold eats more than flesh, it eats souls. They continued deeper until the tunnel split into two narrow paths. Koda held the lantern up, studying both. One veered sharply right, the other disappeared into a steep descent. The air from the right passage smelled fresher wine, faint but real. The other reeked of rot and damp. This way, Evelyn said, pointing toward the right. Koda shook his head. Fresh air does not always mean safety. Sometimes the earth tricks the desperate. Or maybe it's showing mercy, she countered, her tone firm. He regarded her for a moment, then nodded slightly. We follow your heart then. If it lies, we will make it pay. The path widened slightly, enough for them to walk side by side. Faint carvings appeared again along the stone, small circles and arrows scratched with a miner's knife. Evelyn traced one with her fingers. "He was here," she whispered. "He made it this far." Koda crouched beside a small wooden box wedged between rocks. It was wrapped in oilcloth, the edges rotted. He broke the seal carefully and opened it. Inside lay a folded piece of paper and a tiny pouch of gold dust. Evelyn gasped. "That's his handwriting." Koda handed her the letter. She unfolded it with trembling hands, the paper yellowed and brittle. "Evelyn, if you ever find this, know that they lied. The gold is not from this world. It burns the hands that hold it. Leave this place before it swallows you too." Her lips quivered as she finished reading. He knew he was going to die. Koda's eyes darkened. "He tried to warn you." And still the others came. They must have found this gold and killed him to keep it. Evelyn opened the pouch. The gold inside shimmered strangely, almost glowing under the lantern light. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. "What is this?" she whispered. Koda recoiled slightly. "Not gold. Spirit metal. My people call it Keb, Yahtzee, the cursed child of fire. It comes from the sky. Long ago a star fell here and the land has been sick since." Evelyn stared at the glittering dust in disbelief. "You're saying this came from the heavens?" "I'm saying men should never have touched it." Before she could respond, the tunnel trembled again. Stones cracked above them, and a low rumble rolled through the ground. Evelyn screamed as part of the ceiling caved in, a rain of dust filling the air. Koda grabbed her, pulling her out of the way as a beam crashed down where she'd stood. "Move!" he shouted, dragging her through the falling debris. They stumbled forward, coughing, eyes stinging. The rumble faded, but the air had changed. The wind that once felt fresh now carried something cold and wrong. Koda stopped, lowering the lantern. In front of them, the tunnel opened into a cavern glowing faintly with that same golden shimmer. Embedded in the rock walls were veins of the strange metal, glowing softly like veins of fire beneath the skin of the earth. Evelyn's breath caught. This is what he found." Koda's face was grim. "And what killed him?" He touched the rock gently, his fingers trembling. "The spirits beneath have no rest. This place burns with their anger." Evelyn took a step closer, entranced by the beauty of the glowing ore. He wanted to build a life with this. He thought it was hope. "And it was a curse," Koda said. "A promise from the earth that men could not keep." A distant echo of voices broke their trance-muffled shouts and the clatter of rocks. Evelyn froze. "They're back," she whispered. Koda extinguished the lantern with a quick breath, plunging them into near darkness lit only by the eerie gold veins. "They will not stop until they find what's hidden here," he said. "We cannot fight them in the open. We must vanish into the earth." Evelyn swallowed hard. "And if the earth doesn't let us go?" Koda looked at her, his expression fierce and unwavering. "Then we make it remember our names." They slipped deeper into the glowing cavern, their shadows swallowed by the light that wasn't quite gold and wasn't entirely human. The night wind howled through the canyon like a wounded wolf. Evelyn sat near the riverbank, her hands trembling as she tried to start a small fire. Sparks flew from the flint, catching the dry brush, and soon the fragile flame flickered to life, soft, golden, and fragile, like the hope she barely held on to. Across from her, Koda, the Apache warrior, crouched silently, his face unreadable in the firelight. The reflections of the flames danced across his bronze chest, and the turquoise beads at his neck glimmered like scattered stars. "Why didn't you kill them?" Evelyn finally whispered. Her voice cracked, carrying the weight of fear and confusion. Koda didn't answer immediately. He tossed a piece of wood into the fire, watching the sparks rise toward the black sky. "Because," he said slowly, his deep voice echoing against the canyon walls. "Death is too easy for men who live for pain. I'd rather they live knowing they failed." Evelyn's gaze softened, though the fear still lingered. "You speak like a man who's seen too much of it." "I have," he replied. "And so have you." For a moment, only the river spoke, its steady murmur a reminder that life still moved on, even when everything else had stopped. Evelyn's eyes were drawn to the cuts across Koda's arms. She reached out instinctively, her hand trembling as she touched his skin. "You're hurt," she murmured. He didn't flinch. "I've had worse." But she didn't pull away. Instead, she tore a strip from her dress and began to wrap it around his wound. "You may not care about yourself," she said softly, "but I do." Koda looked at her, his expression shifting for the first time that night. The fierce warrior seemed, for a brief heartbeat, human, vulnerable even. The fire crackled between them, and Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. "You should sleep," he said finally, his tone quieter now. "I'll keep watch." Evelyn shook her head. "I don't think I could sleep, not after what happened. Those men, they looked like they wanted more than gold." "They wanted control," Koda replied, his eyes narrowing at the darkness beyond the fire. "The kind that takes from others and calls it law. It's the same kind that burned my people's homes." He stood suddenly, scanning the ridge above. His movements were fluid, silent as the river. Evelyn followed his gaze, her heart tightening. "You think they'll come back?" "They always do," Koda muttered, gripping his knife. Minutes passed. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. Then a distant sound cut through the night, the neigh of a horse, sharp and echoing. Evelyn's body froze. "They found us," she whispered. Koda turned to her, his voice low and firm. "Go to the rocks by the river's bend. Stay low. Don't move until I come for you." "I'm not leaving you." She protested. He looked at her, eyes burning with something fierce, something almost tender. "You will." "Because I need you alive, Evelyn." Before she could answer, he was gone, melting into the shadows like a spirit of the desert. Evelyn's chest heaved as she crawled toward the river bend, clutching her shawl close. The sounds of hooves grew louder, and then gunfire. The shots cracked like thunder, echoing through the canyon walls. She flinched, pressing her hands to her ears. The fire had died behind her, swallowed by the night. When the echoes finally faded, the silence that followed was worse, heavy, and uncertain. Evelyn's throat tightened as she whispered, "Koda." Moments later, a figure appeared through the smoke. It was him. Blood streaked his shoulder, his breathing heavy. But his eyes were still alive, burning bright with defiance. "They won't follow us again," he said hoarsely. Sitting beside her, Evelyn reached for him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're bleeding again," she said, her voice breaking. Koda smiled faintly, leaning back against the rock. "It's nothing. Just another scar for the desert to remember." She looked at him, really looked, and realized she didn't see a savage as the townsfolk had warned her. She saw a man who had lost everything, yet still chose mercy when vengeance would have been easier. The river's glow caught the edge of his face as he turned to her. "Tomorrow we leave this place," he said. "There's a settlement beyond the canyon. Maybe there you'll find what you came for." Evelyn hesitated. "And you?" "I was never meant to stay in one place," he said quietly, but as she rested her head on his shoulder, listening to his heartbeat echo with the rhythm of the river, she silently prayed, not for escape, not for safety, but for one more dawn beside him, because somewhere in that wild canyon, between danger and silence, she had already found what she hadn't known she was searching for, a reason to stay. The morning sun crept slowly over the canyon, turning the sky into a river of molten gold. The fire had died out, leaving only curls of smoke rising into the still air. Evelyn sat by the riverbank, her hair tangled from the night wind, her face pale with exhaustion. Beside her, Koda stood on the ridge, his silhouette strong and solitary against the blazing horizon. He hadn't spoken much since dawn. His wounds were wrapped, but the blood had dried into a dull brown crust. His eyes scanned the desert below, always searching, always waiting, like a man who'd learned never to let his guard down. Evelyn finally broke the silence. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. Koda didn't turn. "Sleep is for men who have homes to return to." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Evelyn rose, brushing the dust from her skirt, and walked closer. "Then what about me? I don't have a home either." He looked at her then, really looked. "Maybe that's what makes you dangerous," he said quietly. "A person with nothing left to lose can do anything." She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "You sound like you've known that kind of loss." Koda's gaze drifted toward the eastern cliffs. "When the soldiers came, I was away hunting. They took my wife, my son." His voice broke for the first time, the words rough and low. "I found what was left days later. The river carried them both away." Evelyn's hand went to her mouth. "Koda? I didn't know." "You weren't meant to," he said, his tone calm but distant. "The world doesn't stop for sorrow. It just keeps taking until you stop feeling." But Evelyn felt. Every word he spoke seemed to echo inside her chest. She wanted to comfort him, to reach out and touch his scarred soul. But she sensed he was a man who built walls out of pain, walls no one had dared to climb. They began their journey again by mid-morning, following the canyon trail that wound toward the high desert plains. The air shimmered with heat, and the smell of sagebrush filled their lungs. Evelyn rode beside Koda on a horse he had stolen from the outlaws' camp. For hours, neither spoke. But then, as the trail narrowed, Evelyn's eyes caught something in the sand, hoof prints. "Fresh ones. Koda," she whispered. "Someone's been here." He stopped instantly, dismounting and crouching to study the tracks. His fingers brushed the earth. "3 riders," he murmured. "One heavy, one small, one limping horse. They're close." Fear coiled in Evelyn's chest. "Are they after us?" "Maybe," Koda said, straightening slowly. "Or maybe fate doesn't like to let go." They pressed on carefully. The canyon walls tightened, forcing them to move single file. The sun was merciless now, the heat pressing down like a weight. When they reached the narrow pass, Koda raised a hand, a signal to stop. Voices echoed faintly ahead. Koda's hand went to his knife. Evelyn's heart pounded. Then, from behind a boulder, a young native boy appeared, barely 12, his clothes torn, eyes wide with fear. "Koda!" The boy gasped. "They're coming." "Soldiers." Koda rushed forward, gripping the boy's shoulders. "Where?" 2 miles east. "They're burning camps again." Evelyn felt her stomach twist. "Burning camps?" Koda's face hardened like stone. "They're wiping out the last families that remain here." He turned to her, eyes fierce. "You have to leave, Evelyn. Go to the ridge and don't look back." "No," she said, grabbing his arm. "I'm not running while people die." "This isn't your fight," he said sharply. "But it's yours," she shot back. "And I'm standing with you." For a long moment, the only sound was the hot wind rustling through the sage. Then Koda nodded once, a silent agreement. "Then you'll follow my lead," he said. They followed the boy down the narrow trail until smoke began to rise in the distance, thick, black, and cruel. The scent of burning wood and flesh filled the air. Evelyn covered her mouth, her eyes watering as they crested the final ridge. Below, the remains of a small Apache camp smoldered. Tattered tents, overturned pots, and silence where laughter should have been. Koda knelt in the ashes, his fingers tracing a small bead necklace half buried in the dirt, one identical to his own. He clenched his jaw, the pain too deep for words. Evelyn knelt beside him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He looked up at her, eyes wet, voice trembling. "No," he said. "Don't be sorry. Be strong. Because the world will remember us only if we stand, not if we mourn." She took his hand, dirt and ash staining both their skin. The wind rose, carrying embers through the air like fireflies, and in that broken canyon filled with loss, Evelyn realized she was witnessing something sacred, not just grief, but the birth of resolve. And when Koda stood again, his eyes burning brighter than the flames behind him, she knew the fight was no longer his alone. It was theirs. The sky was bruised purple when the first gunshot echoed across the canyon. Koda froze, his instincts sharper than the wind. Evelyn dropped low behind a rock, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Smoke still curled from the burned-out Apache camp behind them, but now the soldiers were close, too close. Koda's voice was calm, though his eyes were cold fire. "They found us." Evelyn looked toward the ridge. "There's no cover. What do we do?" He glanced at her, then at the trembling boy beside them. "We fight," he said simply, "and we make them remember." Before she could respond, the second shot came closer. Dust burst from the rock beside her head. Evelyn ducked and gasped, tasting grit in her mouth. Koda moved like a shadow, grabbing his bow from his horse's saddle and sliding into position behind a boulder. His movements were silent, controlled, deadly. Evelyn crawled beside him. "There are too many," she whispered. Koda's lips curved into a faint, grim smile. "There always are." 3 soldiers appeared at the canyon mouth, their blue coats catching the morning light. One raised a rifle. Koda drew his bow and fired. The arrow struck true, cutting the man down before the echo faded. The other 2 ducked for cover, shouting orders. Evelyn's hand shook, but she picked up a fallen revolver near a burned tent. She had never fired one before. Her fingers fumbled with the hammer, but she steadied herself and took aim. "Koda," she said breathlessly, "I can help." He looked at her, sweat glistening on his bronzed skin, hair whipping in the wind, and nodded. "Then aim for the heart, not the body." Another burst of gunfire ripped through the canyon. Bullets ricocheted off stone, one grazing Koda's arm. He didn't flinch. Evelyn fired, the gun kicking hard in her hands. A soldier fell. Smoke filled the air. The sound of battle was everywhere. Shouts, thunder, the whine of bullets, the roar of vengeance. Then, silence. Koda rose slowly, knife in hand, scanning the rocks. A shadow moved behind a boulder. The last soldier, crouched and ready. Koda's eyes narrowed. He stepped forward and the man lunged, a flash of steel, a grunt, a struggle. Evelyn watched in horror as they wrestled, the knife glinting in the dust-filled light. "Koda!" she screamed. The knife flashed once more, then stopped. The soldier fell, his weapon clattering on the stone. Koda stood over him, chest heaving, blood on his side. The desert wind moaned through the canyon like a spirit mourning the dead. Evelyn rushed to him, catching his arm. "You're bleeding again." He looked down at her, breathing hard. "It's nothing." But she could see it wasn't nothing. The cut was deep, the blood dark and steady. "Sit," she ordered, her voice trembling but firm. "Now?" he obeyed, collapsing beside the riverbed where the ashes still glowed faintly. She tore another strip from her skirt, pressing it against the wound. He winced, but his eyes never left hers. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said quietly. "You could have been free by now." Evelyn shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Freedom means nothing if you lose your soul to get it. You saved me, Koda. I wasn't going to let you die alone." He smiled faintly. the kind of smile that held both sorrow and peace. "You have more courage than most warriors I've known." They sat there as the wind carried away the last of the smoke. The boy, silent and wide-eyed, approached with a canteen of water. Koda took a sip, then handed it to Evelyn. "Go with him," he said. "He knows a way through the mountains. You'll be safe. And you?" she asked, fear breaking through her voice. "I'll find you," he whispered. "When the world stops burning." She shook her head. "Don't make promises you can't keep." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle despite the blood on his hands. "Then I'll make one I can," he said softly. "I'll live. For both of us." The sun broke through the clouds then, a blinding golden light spilling over the canyon walls. Evelyn helped him to his feet. Together they watched the light stretch across the desert, painting everything in shades of hope and sorrow. Koda turned toward the horizon where smoke and sunlight met. "The land remembers," he murmured. "And so will we." Evelyn reached for his hand. Their fingers laced together, rough and fragile. Strong and uncertain, they walked toward the rising sun, two souls bound by the same wound. The same fire, the same unspoken truth. That love, in the end, was not about belonging, but about surviving long enough to choose each other in a world that tried to tear them apart. And as the canyon wind swept away the last ashes of the night, the desert bore witness to their vow silent, eternal, unbroken. For in the heart of the Wild West, among blood and dust, they had found something even rarer than freedom. They had found each other.